I have a lot of things to say here, but one of the main problems that we see here are invasive species. There's the red oak itself, which we can see here. It's this one with the, oaks have lobed leaves. In the case of red oak, it's big and spiky, and it gets a bit red. The whole plant gets a bit red, and we can see that here. Now, probably about 80 or 90 years ago, somebody planted some plants here. They're American plants, they shouldn't be here, okay? They were planted. And we've already talked about this, but basically the seeds fall, well, the fruits fall under the plants and it spreads everywhere. So here, there's a project that's aimed at the red oaks, but there are other invasive species here. This plant here is not salvia, it's Buddleia davidi, which people grow because it makes nice inflorescences that the butterflies come to. They use it by railways also to stabilize the railway tracks, so it spreads out from railways. We've seen Robinia sudacacea, and there are probably lots of other invasive species around here, but this project has cut the red oaks, and it has to keep cutting the red oaks, and that's doing two things. It's favoring the native species, and they also planted native species as well, so it's making space for those. We have a birch tree here, which looks like a young 𝘘𝘶𝘣𝘳𝘳𝘢. It has these heart-shaped leaves with a double tooth, so it's one of these families like 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘆, but in this case it's got the heart-shaped leaf, the double teeth, and it has lenticels on smooth bark. So it's a birch. Those characteristics mean that it's a birch. This is 𝘘𝘶𝘣𝘳𝘳𝘢. Okay. That's interesting. This is an aspen. This tree is an aspen. You can tell that it's a poplar
because of the
because the leaves are trembling, because it has this flattened petiole. Okay. And the poplar with the round leaves is actually called Populus tremula. Populus tremula. In English it's called aspen, and you can really tell from a distance that it's a poplar, especially a Populus tremula, because you can see the leaves. You can even hear them sometimes going shh.
Might you see it tremola because it tremola?
Because it trembles.
Trembles. Yeah. In Italian, tremola.
Il pioppo tremolo. Pioppo tremolo in Italiano. And it's for that flattened petiole. Okay, so we do have some natural species here, and we have the naturalized sweet chestnut, 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘆 sativa. I've seen some bracken. There's some bracken at my feet. This is the fern that gets big. This is a native species, and here we can see that there's just a bit of bracken. It's not really covering everything. And yeah, there's an ash tree there, Fraxinus excelsior. So the idea is to favour these plants, but it's a project where the red oaks have to be cut all the time. But this is a controversial project because in the eyes of the public, conservation is about planting trees. And if somebody cuts the trees, then they're doing something against nature, against conservation. And especially the town of Valmedrera, which we can see there, which looks onto this side of the mountain, they had a big problem with this. It's like a scar on the landscape. The director of the park has done something against nature or something like that, and they don't appreciate that this is actually an invasive species which is killing the native species, and so he's doing something to favour the native flora. But there's something else which is really something that you have to understand. It's not that the director of the park got up one morning and said, I'm going to cut those trees. There is a legal reason. There are several legal reasons why this work was done. One is that the park, which is actually a legal entity, has an obligation to protect the habitats and the flora. That's a general obligation. Then there's also a, what can I call it, a management plan for the forest, which is actually a legal document which is approved by the Lombardy regional government, and that actually refers to a law from 2008 which obliges the park to look after the forests and keep them in a good state. And the other thing is that at the level of Lombardy, also the national level and also the European level, there is this recognition of what we call, well, invasive exotic species or species on the black list. The European Union calls it the Union List. The Union List is a list of species which should be eradicated. They're invasive, they damage natural habitats. And at the level of the Lombardy region, we have a blacklist, La Lista Nera, where we have these species. We have Robinia, we have the 𝘳𝘶𝘣𝘳𝘢, we have the Quercus rubra, and we have a legal obligation when we find them to exterminate them. So there's a general conservation reason, a specific forest management reason, really at the level of a law which obliges the director to do this work. So in 2014, the park produced a management plan for the forests, and this was approved by the regional government in 2018, and it was approved again in a legal way. It's a decree by the committee of the regional government, and that refers to the law from 2008. It's La legge regionale 31 del 2008, the regional law number 31 of 2008, which is for the management of the landscape and the forests and fish. So this forest management plan is actually a legal document. The park is legally obliged to manage the forest in a way that maintains the natural habitats. So when people criticize this work, I can see why they do it, because the trees have been cut. At least at the start of the project, it's very open and it really does look like a scar. But there is a reason for it, and it's a reason that favors the recovery of the vegetation in the long term, and you have to take the long-term view. And I have to say that this is a project that was started about 5 years ago. When I came here last year, it was extremely open. You could see everything. You could see the town of Valmedrera. There was actually no red oak visible, just a few shoots of red oak, but also the native species were very small. Now I see that everything is growing up, the native species, the invasive species, and the park has to come out when it gets a bit of money for petrol to make the machines work. They come out and they cut. So it's an ongoing project, and it will be an ongoing project until the native vegetation establishes a canopy. So the idea is to keep the red oak small, and eventually there'll be a canopy which blocks the light and it won't grow anymore. I'm not sure if that'll work. I think in 100 years we'll probably have red oak here still, but that's the idea of the project. This is interesting. So it's doing something similar to the aspen. It has leaves with a flattened stalk, but the leaves, these are very young, but they'll become heart-shaped. Now I said that the aspen is Populus tremula. This also has the flattened petiole, it's Populus, but it's not Populus tremula. And because the leaves are kind of basically shiny and dark, this looks like Populus nigra, the black poplar, okay, which we saw at the Botanic Gardens. Yeah. This plant here is interesting. This is a grass called Molinia cerulea. Cerulea means that the leaves are a kind of greeny, waxy coloured. But this is a plant that can become dominant in heathlands, along with heath plants, with Calluna vulgaris, but we also find it in the understory. So it's a plant it should be here. It's exposed at the moment, obviously, because they've cut the canopy. But as the forest develops, we should find Molinia cerulea in the understory. So it's nice to see that here. Okay. Very often people don't really give much attention to these grasses, but they are typical elements of the understory. But what I wanted to do was see under here what we can find. Yeah, we can't really see it, but when I came last year, you could see the bases of the trees, which is probably under here, and then you have all of these shoots that are coming up, basically from the cut stump of the tree. So when they came and they cut it about 5 years ago, the stump and the root system are still alive, and they just make more shoots. So one of the problems of invasive species, especially invasive trees, is that you have to keep coming back, keep cutting and keep checking them. This is getting a bit out of control now. And actually I think this illustrates a problem with conservation projects, that very often you get the funds to do this work, and the funds obviously means money to pay people to come and cut and do the work, and you get these funds for 2 or 3 years and that's it. So the park has to keep finding projects, keep finding people to come out and cut, and if they don't keep this basically this financial activity going, then the trees are just going to start growing again and start taking over.
And all the money that they have received before, they would be useless.
I don't know if it's completely wasted, because anyway they've done something to favour the natural vegetation. Because really, when the red oak was here before, it was planted, and so it would have been really favoured. It would have people actually working in its favour. But now it's let's say that the natural world has a head start on it, and there is some hope. I don't think it's completely wasted, but
would it be legal for us, like normal people, to remove this from the regional park?
if I'm not wrong, I think actually if you see it and you identify it and you know what it is, you probably have a legal obligation to kill it.
Okay.
A bit like grey squirrels, the American squirrels. If you see one and you trap one, you're not supposed to release it into the wild again. You're supposed to kill it. You put it in a sack and you throw it in the river, that kind of thing. So, yeah, very often we see people looking, taking photos of grey squirrels and saying, "Isn't that cute?" But actually, legally, they should be killing it so that the squirrels that should be there can actually survive.
That's a big problem in England, no?
Yeah, yeah. We've lost almost all of our red squirrels. They only live in parts of Scotland now. Well, if we go down there, there are some tree stumps, but I suspect that it's basically like this. So I think what we'll do is we'll follow the path here, and when we go into the woodland, there's a tiny hidden path that I have to find. And we're going to go up to the second site, which is up above us. Okay. But basically this is the main site, and they took away, they removed 420 trees, I think. 420 trees.
Wow.
There's a lot of energy in here. The wood and the root system, it's not just, like wood is not just some kind of dead tissue, it also has what we call parenchyma, the living cells, which can be full of starch.
That's the same thing we were seeing in the other area last 2 weeks ago when we went. We saw the tronco. And
the trunk. And yeah, so it has energy to get started, and then once it's photosynthesizing, it just keeps growing. And even the stems are green here, so that's going to be photosynthesizing as well. So it's a very difficult plant to stop. And then the other effect is all the seedlings that can grow underneath it as well. So this is much bigger than it was last year. You can tell why they call it red oak, right?
Yeah. He's the only one that I think.
Because it's red, yeah.
What's this?
Alba.
Sorbus alba, white beam.
Something alba.
Because I remember Alba was white.
So we have field maples here. And this is prunus. Okay, we can see the lenticels and the leaves of prunus, the field maples. But it's all being overgrown by this the 𝘳𝘶𝘣𝘳𝘢 daridi. This field maple is getting quite big, but it's being overgrown. So they've done this work to plant the plants, and now it's getting overgrown. They need to come and cut it again. The other thing is that, and I think this is a general message for conservation projects, it's not done by one person, and the different people don't really necessarily understand what they're doing. So, for example, the director of the park approves a project in which they say put 100 plants of field maple, all the other species, you put them here. But then there'll be two guys that come out with some spades and dig, and they're just manual workers that don't necessarily think about what they're doing. And so we have several field maples here literally around me, and we have the prunus, and in 20 years time in this space there's space for one big tree. So if these plants are put literally like 50-60 centimeters apart from each other, you're not going to have 5 field maples and a bird cherry tree. You're going to have one of these that survives. So the people that have put these down haven't necessarily thought about the future of the project, and that's probably more of a problem of communication, and the fact that for example, the director of the park can't necessarily come out and check all of the work as it's done. Although I have to say he is a person that does go out and check, and sometimes he finds these problems. As a general message for conservation projects, for many people the project is having 2 years worth of money to pay someone, and if it's used in an effective way is a different thing. So I think I'm not criticizing this project, because it is difficult to get these projects to work. And I think that it is a positive step in the right direction, but you can see the flaws in this project. It will only have had funding for that first intervention, and now they need to find money to cut the woodland and the red oaks again. And also I think that the trees are planted in groups that are really close together. There was another group over there, another group over there, and they're all stuck in the same place. So in 20-30 years we're only going to have one tree here. We didn't really see any red oaks in the woodland there, and then we got to a point where there was wood on the floor, where they'd started cutting. So I think actually they started cutting where the red oaks were encroaching, where they were coming into the woodland. So I think they have got the right area, and other parts of the mountain don't have red oaks on them, and this is where it was planted originally. This has petals which are white and which actually look like petals, and another detail is it has these reproductive structures. That's actually the female fertile part called the stigma, and it's in 3 bits sticking up like this. This is a characteristic of the rush family, 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘄. And another characteristic, if we take the stem, it's cylindrical and it will be full of tissue, whereas grasses are hollow inside. This is a 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘄, which we can find in the understory, called 𝘳𝘶𝘣𝘳𝘢. Nivea because it looks like the snow. Nivea. And that's really good to see here. You can imagine in the future there'll be a closed canopy, and you'll see these little white flowers in the understory. With the Molinia as well, this is getting quite big, which can crowd out the other plants. We have Erigeron annuus, which is an invasive species from America, which is a ruderal species that grows in disturbed land that gets everywhere. This is a second area, and I'm breathing hard, you're breathing hard, and there's a serious point here. To do this work, they did exactly what we did, but with the chainsaws, with all the equipment, on foot. So some projects you can't get there by road, it's difficult to get there. So this is an example of an area where they did the work by foot, basically. So this whole area up there, and it is like the other area. We can see the red oaks, we can see these big lumps of red oak sticking out. This maybe would have been one tree that was cut down, and now it's sprouting up again. With the light we have the bracken, this fern, taking over, which will cover everything in the understory, or what will be the understory. We can see plants of Polygonum multiflorum in there. There's another plant here which is typical of the understory called 𝘳𝘶𝘣𝘳𝘅𝑗𝑐𝑢m. So yeah, we can see the sweet chestnut trees, 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘍𝑒 sativa, We have a mixture of elements that we've seen down there, and this is the second project site. What we're going to do is follow the path up here, and we're going to get to a bit eventually when we have some really big red oaks. And because they were doing all of this on foot, they couldn't just take the wood away. You can't just get a 90-year-old tree and walk home with it. So we're going to see what they did there. Basically they killed them and left them in place. So we're going to go and see that. Identify the tree. You look at the leaves, you look at the bark. Tell me about the leaves. What features do you see? Tell me about the margin of the leaf, tell me about the veins.
Celtic?
Very smooth without the tooth margin.
They have an entire smooth margin, okay? But it's not completely smooth. It doesn't have teeth, it has something else on the margin.
Hairs.
It has hairs on the margin. Okay, really when you're identifying plants you have to get it in your hand and really look at it. So it has hairs on the edge.
Fagus?
Fagus sylvatica.
Okay, Fagus sylvatica. The other characteristics are the deep venation, which makes it wavy on the edge. And then the bark, of course, which looks a bit like 𝘘𝘶𝘤𝘳𝘳. It's kind of grey, like elephant skin, and fairly smooth. So all of these characteristics together. I mean, you should look at the fruits as well, but this is Fagus sylvatica. So in English it's beech, in Italian il faggio. So this place is called Valfae, the Valley of the Beeches, and we've seen our first beech today. Well, we're seeing a seedling here, a sapling. It's a small tree.
Americana, something Americana.
No, it's not something Americana.
From Asia.
Burla.
No.
Davide.
No, that was the 𝘘𝘶𝘤𝘳𝘳𝘳𝘳𝘳𝘳𝘳.
Sanguinea something.
Sanguinea, no.
No.
We are saying all.
Well, it's red, so sanguinea maybe.
That's a nice guess, because there are many plants that have a red stalk and they have the name sanguinea. But no, this is a seedling, so it's not necessarily easy to identify. But it has these compound leaves, and you can tell that this is an entire leaf because at the base there's a bud, and these leaflets don't have a bud at the base, so they're not separate leaves. This is one leaf. Compound leaf, long compound leaf, reddish, a little bit hairier, Robinia is that one there.
Yeah, like the different leaves.
This is Robinia, okay, with the round leaflets. This also has a compound leaf, but Robinia has thorns and it has rounded leaflets, okay, different. This is called in English the tree of heaven, or Ailanthus altissima, because it gets very, very tall, altissima. You understand that?
Yeah.
So if it's grown in a park, because originally they were grown in parks or used by the railways to stabilize the railway tracks, like the woodland, it grows as a monopodial tree, and it does get altissima. Okay, when it's not cut, it becomes a very tall, thin, elegant tree.
That's why heaven, because it reaches heaven.
Actually, I'm not sure why heaven. Your homework for tonight is to find out why it's called the tree of heaven.
No.
But when it's cut, or if there's some kind of damage, it spreads out. It can look quite stately and elegant even then, but in this kind of situation, if it's cut at the base, it can just grow up everywhere. And it produces hundreds of small fruits which fly around on the wind, and it spreads everywhere. It spreads because those fruits go on the wind, but it also spreads because underground it has lateral stems that are growing underground. It has the root system, and then it comes up with what we call in English suckers. So
Polloni.
Suckers. They're new shoots that come up at a different point, and they can come up with a pressure that's enough to break rocks. They can break through the tarmac of roads, they can break walls, even big stone walls they can break. So it's actually a real economic problem where they grow in a city and they start breaking buildings or roads. So Ailanthus altissima, it got its foothold in our cities and in our landscape from gardens, basically, from gardens. And basically, if the person isn't there cutting it all the time or checking it, then it escapes and it causes problems for everyone else. So this single plant, I don't see any others around here.
Over there, behind you.
Ah, there's one over there, there's one over there, and one over there. Anyway, they're in like points. And what that suggests to me is that they've come as a cloud of seeds, and a seed has fallen there, a seed has fallen there. And they've probably come from down in the valley there, from the gardens or the roadsides. Ailanthus altissima, l'ailanto. Not really asymmetrical. It has the double serration on the leaves. They're very young, they're just coming out.
Carpino bianco.
The carpino bianco. But to be really sure, we'd need to see the inflorescence. On carpino bianco, it has these bracts which have 3 points, 2 small points and then a big point. Well, not this big, but and the other species it could be is Ostrea carpinifolia, which has different bracts. It has rounder bracts, so we'd need to see it in flower. It's actually in the same family, though. If we were to see the flowers and the fruits, we'd think it was the same thing, but the leaves are quite different. 3 leaflets, whereas Robinia has lots and lots of leaflets. This is, you're going to say the name when I say the Latin. We saw this at the Botanic Gardens. Laburnum anagyroides, which I said is the Latin for
Maggio ciondolo?
Bravo.
But we don't see the yellow flowers. So
You don't see the flowers, but you, as a botanist, you should look at the leaves and the bark and all of the characteristics together to understand what it is. So the thing that strikes you about these leaves is that it's definitely from the pea family, because they have compound leaves with an entire margin, and they're quite broad and rounded, and it looks like a clover you would find in the grass, but really big on a tree. So that's a clue that it's probably fabaceae. To be absolutely sure, you'd have to see the structure of the flower and the fruit, but being where we are, in the type of woodland that we are, and seeing this, the only thing it could really be is Laburnum anagyroides, Maggio ciondolo. So even if we don't see it in flower, we can identify it. Okay.
Okay, Chuck.
You're going to eat it?
I'm not going to eat it,
no.
no.
Okay.
It would actually be a crime to eat it.
Okay.
Because according to one of the regional laws, if I damage or destroy this plant, it's against the law. It's what we call a C1 protected species. C1 means that it's in need of absolute protection. But it's a characteristic of oak-hornbeam woodlands. This is an orchid. We can't see the flowers because it flowers quite early and then it loses the flowers, which are white, and they're actually quite big. They're white flowers about this big. And it has these long pointed leaves, and this is the sword-leaved helleborine, or 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘳𝘢 longifolia. 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘳𝘢 longifolia. So we should be seeing that in the woodlands. There are 2 other species. One is smaller and has rounder leaves, which is 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘳𝘢 damascenium, and there's one with red flowers called 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘳𝘢 rubra, which is very rare. There are some plants on a mountain just over there, like 16 plants on a mountain over there. This is the common one. This is the common sword-leaved helleborine. So maybe we'll start to see it as we go through. There are other orchids that we might see as we go into the woodland here. For example, there's a parasitic orchid.
In the trees?
No, not epiphytes. In Europe we don't have epiphytes because epiphytes need kind of guaranteed rainfall, and it's something that can really only work in the tropics.
Because I haven't seen orchids grow on the ground.
They're called terrestrial orchids.
No,
We use
because I've only seen them on the trees.
Yeah. It's a very big group of plants, and they grow on every continent. There are over 25,000 species. There are 158 species in Italy. In Lombardy there are 51 species of orchid.
Oh.
Okay, and there are a number of orchids that are specialized for the understory, especially living next to the trees, because they use fungi to get some of their resources, especially when they germinate. And these fungi very often are attached to the roots of the trees. It's a green woodpecker laughing.
You told us that.
Yeah.
Or the fungi are degrading the litter and the wood, because fungi are very good at producing enzymes called ligninases, which will break down the lignin in wood. And so we might see some orchids that are specialized for the woodland. There's one in particular which we should look out for, called 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘆𝘆, the bird's nest orchid, and it has this kind of ball of fleshy looking, creepy, horrible flowers. It's a parasite, so it doesn't need to be green. And so it's brown, and maybe if you keep your eyes open you'll see this brown fungusy looking mass that's like a cross between flowers and a fungus. If anyone sees something like that, tell me and we'll see if we can identify it. So that's 𝘘𝘶𝘦𝘳𝘆𝘳𝘢 longifolia.
We have like lots of wetlands.
I have
from,
it, but I can't do
like where I'm from, wetlands, and they are like big trees, and there are orchids on the like up in the tree. I went to see them when they were blooming with my mom.
Do you know what kind of orchids they were? Well, I'm very interested in orchids. I specialize in germinating them. Bravo, well done. It is a seedling of 𝘘𝘶𝘤𝘳𝘆 australis in its natural habitat. Fantastic.
Can you tell by the very pointy apex?
That's
of the leaf
part
as
of
well?
it. Yeah, that's part of it. Okay, of course the main
the
characteristic
three
of the three veins, but because it's called the European nettle tree because the leaves look like nettle leaves, the general shape of the leaf is important, including the tip. Yeah. So if you see it from far off, you think that looks like a nettle. Maybe it's 𝘘𝘶𝘤𝘳𝘆 australis. You go and get a leaf and you look at the base and it's got the three veins and you say, yeah, that's it. So you have general characteristics and then like the real characteristic that confirms it. So we're able to identify seedlings as well. With orchids, very often you see one and then you realize that you're standing on others. No, that's not an orchid. I can see two plants along here that are orchids called Listera ovata. The name ovata gives you a clue. They have two oval leaves. And there's another plant over there on the left. And this is a plant that produces these green flowers, which are pollinated by small flies. And it was actually Charles Darwin that worked out that when the flies get close and they touch it very, very lightly, it actually shoots the pollen onto the head of the insect. Other orchids put the pollen onto insects' bodies or heads, but this one actually shoots it out. It's under pressure and it gets shot onto the head of the insect and sticks there. This is very characteristic of this kind of woodland. In English it's called the 𝘳𝘆 blade. 𝘳 is an Old English word which means two, and blade means leaf. 𝘳𝘆 blade means two-leaved, sorry. So it's very easy to identify. Once you see that, Listera ovata, the 𝘳𝘆 blade, you'll see it everywhere and you'll recognize it. Okay? Okay, so we've just come up a really narrow path, and I told you that the people that are doing this work have to do everything on foot. So you get to a tree like this, which is a red oak. What do? You don't put this on your shoulder and take it down the hill. So you have to cut it in a way that kills it and leave it in place. What they've done here is something called ringing, because the living tissues of the tree are just under the bark in a cylinder around the whole thing is basically cylinders of tissues, and the tissue that basically manages the growth of the trunk is in about this position. In fact, I can probably get it quite precisely. It's actually in this position here. towards the inside it produces wood, produces what we call xylem, which is the tissue, and towards the outside it produces phloem, which is taking the sugar down from the leaves to the roots. So if you interrupt that flow of sap, then you kill the tree. And so when I came here last year, this tree had been ringed probably the year before, but it was covered in leaves. It was still alive last year. And the reason for that is because the wood actually has living cells in it. It has parenchyma in it. And that has water, and it has starch, it has energy. And for a while it can carry on living. Now the younger xylem, the sap wood, which is still active in the transport of water, is here. They made quite a deep cut into the wood, leaving the mechanical wood that's not really taking water anymore, and cutting the physiologically active xylem that would be taking the water up from the roots. But in here there was lots of water still. So for another year it was able to make leaves and probably photosynthesize and live for a bit. But now, as you can see, it looks completely dead. We've got another tree coming and leaning on it from the side, which are those leaves we can see there, but it is completely dead. So what happens next?
Hold on.
It will fall, and over there we're going to go and see a plant that was exactly like this, which has now fallen. So we'll see the final result.
Can I see this? It's a house.
Ants and things. But there's another chapter to the story, he said.
Don't go back here.
Which means you have to walk back uphill. As we've seen with the plants down there, it can grow up from the base. And in fact, these leaves are leaves of red oak, and it's growing from a branch which is coming out of the base here. So,
Let's keep it.
it's not dead. And well, honestly, how are you going to kill that? Are you going to kill that? I'm not going to kill that.
You can try. No.
So this is the problem. They grow back, and you have to keep coming and keep cutting. And when it's such a massive tree like this is probably 90 years old, it's difficult to completely eradicate it. And in fact, when it comes to invasive species, you can't really talk about eradication. Once they're there, they're there. You can't completely eliminate them. So it's all about control and management
There may be some
of invasive
tiny
species.
plants, insects living there.
Okay,
Rip.
now you're free to go downhill and see the other tree.
Okay. I hate the part of going downhill.
Oh, these are orchids,
No, no, no.
no?
Smell them. Smell them. Take one in your hands and crush it. Cold.
Yeah, I can't.
Crush the plant in your hands. Fall down when there's a storm usually. The tree has broken off and it's now lying that way. Maybe you can see the trunk. And we can see that there are fungi growing on it. There'll be ants growing in there. So it's a home for insects, but again, it's regrowing.
Yeah.
Look at all this growth. This regrowth wasn't here last year, and you could just see the trunk from the path up there. So it's really growing quite vigorously. Think about that, a massive tree that's been cut down, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to grow back again. And it's going to spread and occupy more space as well. So these projects really have to keep coming back and keep cutting. It's a continuous financial commitment to do a project against invasive species. It's a simple lesson, we can stop there.
That's